Hello, my name is Matthew Harding, and this is my Human Rights Project. For my Human Rights Project, I chose option C, which is ratifying conventions, and in that, I will be talking about the process used in the U.S. for ratifying United Nations human rights treaties, uh, and this is a multiple step process that we go through. I'll also be talking about treaties that the United States has and has not ratified, and I'll be showing y'all a look into a treaty that the U.S. has not ratified and why I think they should consider ratifying it. The first step in ratifying a United Nations human rights treaty is negotiation. The United States and other countries negotiate about the contents of the treaty. And this process can be very difficult and take a lot of time with 193 countries in the United Nations. The next step in ratifying a United Nations human rights treaty is the President's signature. If the President thinks the treaty is a good idea and is in the nation's best interest and it does not violate the Constitution, he will sign it. Now, this does not make the treaty a U.S. law. There is a couple more steps the treaty has to go through to become a law. The next step after the President signs the Human Rights Treaty is it is sent to the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and they vote to send the treaty to the full Senate and with any recommendations. They can recommend in favor, unfavor, or with no recommendation on the treaty. They can also choose to ignore the treaty completely. Once the treaty has left the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, it is sent to the full Congress. The treaty needs a 2/3 vote from Congress to get approved, which is 67 votes. And the Senate can add RUDs to the treaty, and RUDs is short for reservations, understandings, and or declarations. And in the picture in the bottom right, you can see a gathering at the Senate. After the Senate approves the treaty, it has to go back to the President. Only the President, acting as Chief Diplomat of the United States, has the power to ratify a treaty. The President sends a formal document to the United Nations giving the U.S. government's agreement to abide by the treaty, as well as any RUDs that are included. This is a chart done by the CRC, which is the Committee on the Rights of a Child, that shows the U.S. ratification process for international treaties, and it just shows the outline of the process that the U.S. government goes through to ratify a treaty. This is international human rights treaties the U.S. has ratified. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, signed 1977, ratified 1992. International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, signed 1966, ratified 1994. Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, signed 1988, ratified 1994. Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, signed 1948, ratified 1988. International Convention Against the Taking of Hostages, signed 1979, ratified 1984. International human rights treaties the U.S. has not ratified. International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, signed 1977. Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, signed 1980. Conventions on the Rights of the Child, signed 1995. Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, signed 2000. International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of Their Families, still not signed. Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, signed 2009. International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, still not signed. I think the U.S. should ratify the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. The U.S., along with Iran, Nauru, Palau, Somalia, Sudan, and Tonga, are the only states left in the United Nations to not ratify this treaty. This puts us with all developing countries to not have ratified this treaty. This treaty would cover all aspects of women's rights to equality. In America, it would help with equal pay for equal work, domestic violence, access to health care, and parental leave. Not only that, this treaty would also provide a clear definition of discrimination and equality.